Hey, this is Dan from The Plague. This video is meant to serve as pretty much an introduction to the channel as well as kind of a history of The Plague and its roots back to the 80s as a fanzine originally. It also will introduce kind of just the basic framework of how I want this channel to operate going forward into the future. So it started in 1988. My brother Ted, my cousin Nels, and my best friend from high school, Vico, we were all sharing a house in Eugene, Oregon. We got the idea to start a heavy metal fanzine, and it just kind of blossomed from there. We all had kind of different tastes in music at the time. Ted was into a lot of the classic heavy metal and hard rock. My tastes were a little bit more on the thrash metal and doom metal side of things. Nels was kind of similar in his taste. He also was really into the he played guitar, so he was into a lot of the shredders of the age. And Vico had kind of a different background. He came from more of a new wave and punk background. So we had fairly diverse influences within, the rock realm. But we all had, certain bands that we all could agree on as, just great bands like Metallica, Slayer, Trouble, Suicidal Tendencies. There were several that we all agreed on pretty well. So when we first started the fanzine, I remember the most heavily debated topic wasn't so much who would cover what bands or what direction we should go with the fanzine, but just the name of the thing. And there were several suggestions that were thrown around at the time. I remember specifically suggesting Vicious Visions from the Blind Illusion song of the same name. And thankfully that was voted down quickly. I can't even remember now who exactly came up with The Plague, but it seemed like a good name that kind of covered a lot of bases. It was a little bit mysterious, but it still had a very, metal sort of feel to it. And it was the name of a Nuclear Assault album and, EP, and also a Demon album, which were both bands that we liked. So it seemed like the perfect name at the time. So the first issue was very much a do-it-yourself operation. We had some pirated desktop publishing software for the Apple II and a dot matrix printer, and we proceeded to create a 24-page Xeroxed black and white fanzine. The first issue had, which I have a copy here, it has the local Eugene band Mistress, who were a pretty big deal in the area at the time. They released only one EP and a couple demos, and later changed their name to Zoo Gang, moved to Los Angeles to make it big, and unfortunately never really got going there. But they were a cool band, and there was also two bands outside the Northwest that we interviewed for that first issue, which were Ice Age and Resistance. Now, Resistance was a thrash band from Los Angeles who I don't think ever made it past the demo stage, but Ice Age were on, I believe, their second demo when we interviewed them, and even though they broke up a few years later, they reformed in the 20-teens, and voila, they managed to put out their debut album finally in 2017. So in preparation for this first issue, we wrote to all of the major heavy metal record labels of the time just to see if anyone could add us to their mailing list so we'd have some product to review. Surprisingly, we actually got 3 labels to send us some promos before we even had our first issue out. Road Racer was kind enough to send us Snow White and Toxic, and even the King Diamond album Them, which we got an advanced copy on cassette at the time, which was very exciting. Combat was another label that was very helpful in the early days. They sent us Agony and The Accused and Acid Rain to review for the first issue. And then finally, New Renaissance sent us several things to review, including At War, Wehrmacht, band from Portland, as well as Gargoyle, another band from Portland. So, we were off to a good start. The rest of the review section was basically filled out by either albums that we had purchased ourselves or ones that we had borrowed from the Record Garden where Nels worked. So we continued with pretty much the same format until 1990. With issue number 5, we started screening our photos which allowed us to make much better copies, as you'll see from the cover here. And we were also getting a lot, bigger bands to interview. You can notice Voivod, Hellstar, Testament, among others. We even were able to start interviewing bands in person. For example, we talked to Testament when they played in Portland, and even got a photo pass, so we were able to do some of our own photos instead of just using the stock, publicity photos at the time. So by the fall of 1991, we had moved to a new, larger format on newsprint, and this allowed us to print much cheaper and basically give it away as a free newspaper in local stores. We were still, managing to get some pretty good bands at the time, but we were also, as you can see, our tastes were diversifying a bit. So, we were covering bands like Saigon Kick and Primus, as well as the more classic heavy metal and thrash bands. So Vico and I were both getting into the industrial music scene in the early 90s quite a bit. And so by the final issue of The Plague, which was in 1995, you can see that we were starting to cover bands like ChemLab and Frontline Assembly, Trust Obey, 16 Volt, as well as, still including some bands like, BOC, Tesla in there. But we'd all moved apart, and we were living in different places now, and everyone kind of had their own, busy lives. So that was the point that we decided to call it quits for the printed version of The Plague. So by the end of 1995, I decided to move The Plague online and make it a web zine. And this was very early days of the web, and so the look of it was very basic and pretty ugly, but we got the information across, and it was a lot easier to update it more often than having to go through the whole layout and paste up and getting the fanzine printed like we did in the early days. It was a little bit of a struggle in the early days of the webzine to get some of the labels on board, because they didn't think there was that much of an audience that would follow a webzine. But eventually that got turned around, and by the year 2000, The Plague was looking pretty good. In the early aughts, I began writing for a magazine called Outburn, which had more of an industrial and modern metal approach. And I continued writing with that well into the 2016, I think. And so around 2010 is when I decided to kind of put The Plague to rest. But all of the interviews from the online version of The Plague have been archived and are on a Tumblr page, which I will link in the description below. So yeah, feel free to check those out. Since I haven't been writing for Outburn for several years, and I've had so much downtime in this past year thanks to the pandemic, I decided this was a good time to restart The Plague, and instead of doing another printed version, which was always a pain having to transcribe interviews and just get the formatting to look good, I thought this would be a good time to kind of change things up and start a YouTube channel for The Plague. So the plan is to do album reviews and interviews, maybe some videos on underrated albums from the past that we think deserve more attention. And crazy as it might seem right now, we hopefully will be able to do some concert reviews at some point. The focus this time around will be definitely on heavy metal, period. It will include, the various subgenres: black metal, death metal, thrash metal, whatever, you feel like covering, but it's going to be very much metal focused this time around. I also want to kind of get back to covering some of the Northwest bands, because there's been a lot of exciting new bands coming out of Seattle and Portland just in the last 5 years. So we'll see how it goes. I'm sure it will evolve along the way, but yeah, I'd be really curious to hear what you guys would like to see in The Plague in the future. So please feel free to drop some comments below and let us know what you'd like to see. So yeah, I'm excited to bring The Plague back to connect with some of the metal fans all over the world this time. Please like this video and subscribe so you can be notified when we put up new videos, which I will try to do at least once a week. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, hope you enjoy the channel, and until next time, take care.